All right, hello and welcome to Gig Performer's YouTube channel. My name is Brett Pontecorvo, and I'm really excited because today we are going to be interviewing Mogg from Caffeine, who's doing some really incredible things with Gig Performer, kind of making use of the MIDI file player and scripting. And I'm going to let him explain it because he knows the ins and outs. But I think today's going to be really useful, especially for people who are trying to find solutions to, maybe slightly more complex problems. So let's pull him in. Hey Mogg, how's it going?
Hi Brett, how are you doing?
Doing good. Thanks for being with us today.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on the channel.
Yeah. So before we jump into your setup, I want to can you tell me Caffeine Kill? How long have you guys been working together? And also what were some of your previous setups before you ended up with Gig Performer?
Sure. So Caffeine Kill first formed in 2001, when I started out writing some music, and we found a vocalist. So Jay joined the band in 2001, and it was pretty much just synths, drum machine, and vocals, and we kind of built it up. And then it's kind of evolved throughout the years, sort of introducing guitars and more synthesizers, and really kind of become what it has today.
Yeah. So it's been like a big transition. Like it's been evolving since the time you guys started playing together. It's not been like the same form the whole time through.
No, so the lineup has changed a little bit. The kind of the roles within the band in terms of drummers, bassists have changed, and my particular setup has evolved quite a lot since the early days. Originally, I started off using hardware synths with a hardware MIDI sequencer, which was crazy stuff. It pretty much worked, but it involved carrying a lot of equipment around. And then I started using keytars quite heavily, sort of in 2006. And then since then, I've been kind of trying to pare my setup down so it's much more convenient. And we run backing tracks for the drums and some of the synth effects like loops and things like that. So it's really just trying to take less hardware live and having more more lightweight and easy to carry stuff, and that's kind of led me on quite an interesting journey where I've eventually ended up using Gig Performer, and it's been brilliant.
So when you were using hardware synthesizers, were you programming out all of your drums in like a MIDI sequencer?
Yep. So basically all of the songs were composed using a Yamaha EX5 workstation, and I used the internal sequencer programming all the drums. So everything that was in there was actually being played live through the actual MIDI sequencer and coming out, obviously being mixed down with a mixer on stage with the live synths as well. So it was definitely interesting.
What was the final moment? Was there like a nail in the coffin where you were like, this just isn't going to work for me anymore?
Yeah, we were playing a show, and up until then we'd had years of really great service out of what we used to call BOD, which was the Box of Doom, which was all of the synths.
Okay.
And it was working great, but then middle of the set, it just died. The power went. We lost everything, and it took around about 5-10 minutes just to reload in all of the samples and everything. So fortunately, the rest of the band kind of covered and played an acoustic version of one of our songs, whilst I was fiddling around frantically in the background trying to get it all working again. And for me, I kind of went away from that gig feeling a little bit embarrassed and a little bit jaded with the setup. So I kind of looked for alternatives from then on in.
Yeah, we've all had like one of those moments where you're just like, that didn't go well.
It wasn't good, man. It wasn't good.
So that was it. The bod died, and so then you went down another path to try and kind of find another solution. So what was next? I remember last time we were chatting, you mentioned there was an iPod phase.
Yeah. So immediately after that, we basically mixed everything down to an iPod, to an MP3, put it on the iPod, and just ran that into the mixer, which is great. I mean, it worked, but it just meant everything was committed quite heavily at that point, and to change it meant going back to the studio, and obviously it wasn't ideal. I didn't really feel as authentic running it off of an MP3, so That lasted a number of years before I started looking at different options to give me a lot more flexibility, especially when we're in the rehearsal studio and you obviously want to change a level and kind of just get something to sit a little bit better. And that kind of led me really away from using the iPod.
Right. All right. What? So iPod's out because it's not flexible. Where'd you end up after that?
So the journey then took me kind of two different routes. One, I looked at Ableton. That was becoming really popular at the time. Obviously, it's a great piece of software, great DAW, and it was kind of geared towards live performance. But for me, I just didn't really gel with the actual software itself. I never kind of was able to switch because I was a heavy Cubase user for many years. That was the DAW of my choice, and then I just found it just didn't really sit with me. So I ended up looking at MainStage, being a quite heavy Mac user as well. I looked at MainStage, and that was good. It kind of did most of what I wanted, but it still wasn't quite enough. When we started looking at adding in lighting rigs and all sorts of things, the limitations started appearing quite quickly.
And did you actually take MainStage out to perform with?
I did for about 4 shows. Didn't really like it, and then moved to a product called Show One, which was again using MP3 backing tracks, but you could add in a bunch of MIDI as well, so you could do MIDI controls for lighting or patch changes on synth and things, which kind of pretty much has been up until very recently the way that I've run a lot of our backing tracks.
Okay, and was that was just a 1-track MP3? There was no mixing in that either. It was just okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So was that the last step before you arrived at Gig Performer?
Yep. So up until just before lockdown, basically I was running that setup. It was really good, but again, I still had that limitation creep back in, which I kind of wanted to avoid. So again, I kind of started looking around and seeing what options were available and see if the industry had moved on a little bit more.
Yes, and I'm also remembering. So did you discover Gig Performer just through a Google search? Was that?
Yeah, I was looking around and I was looking at alternatives to MainStage and Ableton, and Gig Performer popped up, and I thought I'll go and have a look, see what it's like, and downloaded. I think it was Gig Performer 3, the trial. And had to play around. I was really impressed at the beginning, but there were a few things that I wanted to do with it that I couldn't. So I was looking around at different options. And
so what in Gig Performer 3? What was the limitation for you? Like where did the functionality cap off?
So the main thing is as our live show was expanding, we were using a lot of lighting and obviously DMX lighting, and I wanted to be able to sync that with the backing track rather than just having generic lights going. So I was looking at options around there, and that's where MainStage really fell down and everything else kind of fell down. So when I looked at Gig Performer 3, I found a way of doing it, but it was essentially using Ableton Link, and then Ableton would run the MIDI file in the background. But for me, that was just too much complexity, too many things that could go wrong.
Sure.
Too many interface points that in the heat of a moment when you're setting up for a show, I didn't want to have that kind of stress and that kind of pressure to do. So I was really kind of looking for another option, I guess.
Right. So and then Gig Performer 4 came out, which MIDI file player is included, and at that point you moved everything straight into Gig Performer. Is that correct?
Yep. So I bought Gig Performer 4 in the offer before it was released. I took a leap of faith, I guess, that the MIDI player was going to come in and solve all the problems I needed, because everything else about it was great. And then obviously when it was released, I pretty much set about building my Rackspaces and my setup for what I needed to be able to control the backing track, all of the synths and the soft synths, and the lighting rig, all from within that sort of setup.
Yes, yeah. So at this point, it's all internal, right? Like everything lives in Gig Performer. You're not traveling with any hardware. So how much are you actually bringing with you to a gig? Like what goes with you when you're performing?
So what goes with me? So as I mentioned before, I'm a big fan of keytars. They're one of those love it or hate it things.
Sure.
I've always loved them. So I kind of like the performance. I'm not really a classically trained musician, so for me it's all about the performance and being in a kind of a rock industrial band. You kind of want to get there at the front with the rest of the band and play. So I use the AX Edge controller keyboard for just as a MIDI controller. And that's running Bluetooth MIDI into a MacBook. I'm also running a Behringer FCB 1010 foot pedal. So that's MIDI, and I'm using wireless MIDI again into the MacBook. And that's what I use to control starting and stopping of the tracks, and skipping tracks backwards and forwards, and also altering volumes and things like that using the pedals. And then it's just Gig Performer with a whole bunch of VSTs and my custom setup. And then I run that, obviously, the lighting rig is run with an NTEC interface, which is USB. It's all in a box, so it's all in the same box together. And then that runs into my audio interface that basically goes to the main stage.
So it's a pretty small setup. But it's I mean, it runs your whole show, right? I mean, it's everything that's happening experientially is running through Gig Performer.
Yeah, absolutely everything. Lighting, audio, backing track, you name it.
It's so cool. Well, I think, should we just jump in, or would you mind showing us kind of what you've done?
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Let me pull this up here so we can see it. All right, so I'm gonna hand you the mic. Tell us what we're looking at here.
Cool. So what we've got here is my main screen with the Setlist. So obviously I spent some time going back through all of the songs that we play live. So we've got currently 25 tracks that we basically will draw from on a set. So depending on the length of the set, we'll draw from different songs. And what I wanted to create is something that was quite consistent against each song. So I have a backing track with all of the VST synths and all of the lighting that is configured and controlled within that Rackspace. So I kind of probably use it in a slightly quirky way that maybe you guys didn't intend for it to be used, but it works, and it's been, so far been absolutely brilliant to work with. So what I've got here, I'll pick on March Time as a track that we currently play. So that's one that we'll be starting our next one of shows off with. So it has a nice intro and then kicks into the main track. And the way I've broken it down is in the same way that it's broken down in Cubase when we actually composed and wrote the track. So we've got an intro, which goes into a verse, and then it's kind of a pre-verse that goes back into a verse, into a chorus, and so on and so forth through the structure of the song. So I've broken it down into individual bits. So we have a single Rackspace with 5 different variations that are set up here. And essentially, if I scroll down through here, and I'll just quickly, as I click through, you'll see the different variations click across, and these are all controlled by the Behringer foot pedal if I want. But I've done something really cool here that I wanted to sort of show you. So I'm quite lazy when it comes to stuff like this. I don't want to have to think about changing the variation, so I've done something really cool which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yes. So this is good also, just to point out, like for rehearsals, the way you have it set up. So like all those faders on the bottom, if you need to adjust a level of something, I mean, you're just going in there, you're moving it, saving the variation, and you're off to the races.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so with some patches, so for example, in the chorus, I might layer up a couple of different sounds. And I will have those mixed down. So this, basically, I can just kind of adjust this fader as I need to, sort of move up and down, and change the volume and bring in any of the sounds that I need, which is really useful.
That's awesome. All right, cool. So this is your setup for March of Time. You've broken it down into the different song sections, and how does it work in context? What is it like when you're getting ready to go on this tune?
Cool. Okay, so what I've got at the top, the first bit you can see up the top here is essentially what I kind of call the transport layer. So this is some buttons I can use to play the current track, stop the current track, skip to the next workspace, next Rackspace, or go to the previous Rackspace. So that's all set up, and these are things all configured to MIDI controllers as well. I've then got the overall volume of the backing track here. The overall volume, a Gig Performer, Metronome, and then patch level. This one I'm probably going to deprecate over time as you'll see time. And also, I've also got buttons here to click on and click off the click track, and then basically start and stop the audio. And these two are linked with the MIDI, which is obviously something that I've done.
And are you running, so for the click track, is this running through the system action, or have you coded that in?
So that's running through a system action.
Okay.
So all of this is grouped up together. So I'll show you that when we actually go into the wiring element of things. We can edit that, but that's all wired up. And then on here, I've got tempo of the current track. So enables me to keep an eye on what the tempo is, just because I like to know these things. Doesn't matter. And then this 4-segment LED here is basically my visual indication of where we are within a bar or a measure.
Yes.
So it helps me keep time if I'm kind of, if we're in a break or coming up an intro that's going to come in, kick into a track. I've got this visual indication that comes in, and then the track length is we're here within the overall output level, so I can kind of see, check if I'm clipping. And then here is basically what beat I'm on, what measure I'm on. Again, that's really useful. Just keeping track of where we are through a song. And then obviously down the bottom here, we've got the mixer section, which I've broken up into the backing track, then each of the individual song parts as well, rather than the actual sounds. And that will become clear in a little bit when I actually sort of break everything down.
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so let me take you into the actual Rackspace, and we'll have a look what we've got here. So yeah, one of the things I kind of wanted to show you in here, if we click up. So you asked how the click and audio bit was working, whether it was working with system actions or with code. So what I've done is, you can see I've actually grouped these sections together. So when I actually click these two, it will start both the audio playback and the MIDI at the same time. And that was something that was quite tricky. And actually one of the users on the your user group actually helped me with this.
This was on the Gig Performer forum.
Yeah, this on Perform, and I asked a question because I want to try and be able to sync these two. It's really important for me to sync, obviously, the MIDI playback and the audio playback together. So they offered two options. One was in code, and one was actually using this grouping. And basically, within here, basically, if I click on here, actually, it's not there now, actually, unfortunately. But basically, I have the right naming for it as well. So it's basically all linked up. By grouping it, it means when I click one, both of them get interactive.
Exactly. And this can also be useful if you end up wanting to do like, controlling multiple audio parameters or whatever, which I guess is probably the original intent. But like, this is a really creative way to use something to get the result that you want. It's beautiful. I love that you're grouping. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and then the click track is literally just linked up to the system metronome. So that's just I use the system metronome from within Gig Performer, whereas I used to use a left and right channel on the MP3 to run those, which again was a real pain if I wanted to add those. But I've got a really cool way that I can actually bring in the click track and remove it as I need to. So that's again wired up to the foot pedal as a controller, so I can just toggle it in and out as I need to.
Yep.
And then this next bit is just a visual indication. We'll go into this in a bit more detail when I show you the code and when you see it working, because it will make a lot more sense. But it's pretty good. And that's really, I mean, in terms of the setup, it's fairly standard widgets within Gig Perform that I'm using. Nothing too crazy, but it all works.
It's like the sum of all of its parts is greater than these individual pieces, right? Like,
sure.
When you start stacking everything together, I mean, you've built, first of all, it's working for you, which is definitely the most important thing. But I'm looking at it from the outside, and you're about to show me some stuff that I definitely don't understand, like just above where my mind is working. But when I look at this setup, I'm like, okay, I know what's happening here. It feels very clear, and that clarity gives you peace of mind when you're performing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I'm on stage, I don't need all the complexity. I just need to see the things that are on this screen, and that's all I need to interact with and see where I'm going. Am I playing the right track? Where we are on the measure and within the sort of position within the song, and any levels, and that's just really kind of set up. And that's why I've organised it in the way that I have. So essentially, at the top here, these are the things that I really care about, and these are the things that if I really need to get to, I can scroll up and interact with them. And change them. But to be honest, it's very rare that I would need to do that, but it's just there as an option should I need it. Where it starts getting complicated is when we actually get into the wiring behind the scenes.
Yes. I'm going to full screen this so we can see what's happening here. This is awesome. All right, go for it.
Sure. Okay, so let me talk to you, and then this kind of start making a bit of sense with what I was talking about earlier. So the way that I split it up, you've got these different layers. So obviously I've got my MIDI layer here. In the center, then I've got what I call the audio layer. So this is a makeup of the audio file player and any various different soft synths that I'm using. So then there's a whole multitude of ones that I will use throughout the song. Then I have what I call the effects layer. So this could be delays, reverbs, or distortions, or anything that I need to add into the particular sound that I'm going to play live, which is again is a great thing because I can actually translate a lot of what I use in the studio straight into Gig Performer and remodel it. So I'm actually playing the exact sounds that I have on the record live, which is just brilliant. Whereas before I used to have to approximate with hardware synths that I might not have used because I want to take maybe a mood live. But
what's crazy is that's becoming what the expectation is, right? Like that you can recreate what people are hearing or do better than what's on your album. And it takes a lot of intentionality in a lot of programs. It's fascinating for me to hear you say that language, because I was literally just yesterday going like, yeah, people are expecting this level of output, but really like there aren't a ton of tools that do this as well as Gig Performer does it. Just in terms of saying, hey, this is what we did on the album, now we can actually do it live.
Yeah, I mean, this is for me the first time I've been able to get almost identical to what I play live, what I play in the studio in a live situation. Previously I've taken 4 or 5 different synths live, hardware synths, but then you'll place effects on them, you do loads of things that you can't necessarily do live, so without taking even more kit. So before you end up moving the whole studio live, and that's just not a place you want to go. So
exactly.
And I do use a lot of soft synths behind the scenes. I've got a bunch of hardware, but I use a whole bunch of the native instruments stuff that I rely on quite heavily, and I can just literally load the presets up into here, add in any of the effects that I need, exactly the same as I've got in Cubase. And I've got it live, so it just sounds identical, and I can kind of mix it and balance it all the way that I want.
And it's also nice too that you've layered in a way where, like, if you need to access something, where your layers are. Like, these little tidbits. I'm learning. I'm gonna redo some of my stuff from watching you. All right, I'm gonna full screen it. Take us back through here. So you've got your layers here, so you can insert your patches. You've got your audio effects. What comes next?
So what comes next is I've got essentially a submix level or submix group here. So all of these are ordered by the different groups of the songs, and you'll see as the instruments feed in, I can feed in the different sounds I have for example, the chorus. I use 2 different pad sounds that I mix together, and that forms one single pad sound overall that's then fed in to a main mixer. So it's like having individual submixes all set up for the different instruments.
Yes,
so if you imagine
and you're labeling them through in song part because that's where your head goes.
Yeah.
And there are no rules. Like, if that works for you, that's what you should do because it increases your speed, right?
Yeah, exactly. And what I can do is if I want to bolster up a sound, so for example, in the verse, I think, actually, do you know what, this dance lead that I'm using is a little bit thin, and I want to add something, maybe something with a bit more bottom end, a sub sound or sub bass or something. I can add that in here very easily, submix it, and I don't have to change anything else. I don't have to worry about mixing any other levels. I can just kind of get it exactly how I want it, and it just makes sense when I'm assigning the groups or the variations here into the different phases of the song.
Yep, that's beautiful. I love it. Okay, so we've got our submixers. You're running into a big audio mixer, and is that the audio mixer at the bottom there? Is that what we see on the front panel with your levels?
Yeah, that is. So if I double click on that, what you've got there is essentially the same mixer. So that's just basically surfacing all of that straight up to the front. Obviously, I've got the unused channel, which I may end up using for something else at some point, but that's literally surfaced all the way up. So it will interact with those as I need to. And I've actually got it assigned to a controller here. So if I change it here, I can kind of see that changing, and that would change on the front end as well. So that's pretty cool.
Awesome.
And then over on the obviously I've got the system actions because I use a bunch of system actions in script, and so I've got that dropped on there, which is quite handy. And then obviously I've got the holy grail of the MIDI file player over here.
Yes.
And as you can see, that's currently wired up to a MIDI out to Light Key, which is a piece of software that I use to control the lighting rig. So that's a really good bit of software that works and obviously manifests up with a MIDI input, software MIDI input. And also I'm starting to use QLab to run some video segments, so I want to be able to sync video clips into different parts of the songs. And QLab seems to be pretty cool for that. It works quite nicely, so I'm going to use that. I haven't actually wired this in, but it's just there ready to go. So
yes. I love it. So what makes sense to go through next? Do you want to show us that light section, or you want to stick in gig performer first?
So what I probably should say actually is a part of this setup is really important to me is when we go live, we don't always take our lighting rig, depending on where we might fit within a bill of a particular show,
Yeah.
or depending on how much time we've got to set up. Obviously, if you're playing a show with lots of bands, like a small festival or something like that, then you don't really have the luxury of time to set up.
Right.
So the great thing about this is it's completely modular. So if I don't want to take my lighting rig, I don't need to take the lighting rig. I can just leave it, but it will just run. And, see this runs in the background. And similar with the video segment, when we start taking that live, we can take it and run it, or we don't have to. It's just very, very modular, and that's really important to me to have that flexibility. So if I'm feeling lazy one day and I want to take the lighting rig, I don't need to take the lighting rig. I just leave it at home.
Yeah, it's like the setup doesn't break when you move one thing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really
and that's
good.
really cool.
Yes, yeah, it's important. It's really good.
And that was kind of what I was talking about earlier, where I looked at Ableton and linking up with Gig Performer before to run this lighting rig. It's just another bit of software that I had to run and make sure it's loaded. And for me, it just left me a little bit nervous, I think.
Yes.
Whereas I know that if this doesn't run, it doesn't matter. It's not the end of the world.
Yep. Yeah, it's too. Every time you introduce another element, there's another potential for an issue. And I think even when you chat with David and Nebosha, they're always very much like, performance peace of mind, right? There is a programming phase, and when you're playing, that's not the time. That's not the time to be worried about it. And it's that peace of mind where you can actually go in and do the performance. And your band is very it is a performance. It's a show. So if you go see Caffeine Kill perform, it's a show, and you can't be worried about your computer not working when you're doing a show where you have to be fully in.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's what it is. So I mean, I'm a tech at heart in background. I was a software engineer for many years.
Yep.
So for me, the creation part of this has been great fun. I've really enjoyed it. It's just been so much fun kind of putting this all together, and you'll see in a bit some of the scripting that I've done to enable some of the things that I want to do. It's been brilliant, but I know because it's reliable, and we've run this for many hours in rehearsal, and it's never skipped a beat. It's just been absolutely solid. But I know that I can do all of that work and then just rely on it when I actually get on stage, and there are no problems. It's one bit of software that just does its thing, and it's just basically exactly what I needed from sort of 10 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. All right, how does it work? What's going on?
Okay, so how does it work? Right. So as I said, I've got a whole bunch of soft synths here. So there's Massive in here. I've got V-Station. So I used to take a K-Station live with me once upon a time. Having this is great. So this is all part of modeling what I use in the studio. I've even got a guitar.
Oh, it's so good.
Which is awesome. So I can kind of recreate some of the guitar effects as well and play those. So some of the weird effects that we might have in an intro. Our guitarist doesn't need to play them. He can play something else, and I can kind of do this on keys, which was pretty awesome. And then I'm running into a guitar rig there with obviously some of the actual effects I've got. So again, this is all stuff that we use live. It's pretty awesome. Use in studio rather. So how does it work? Wow.
I know it's a loaded question. When I asked it, I was like, should I be more specific? Yeah.
So this is probably a good time to take you into the actual script behind the scenes.
Yes, yeah.
So I'm going to bring up the script I've got here. So I probably should add all of the rack spaces for each of the songs are pretty much identical.
Yes.
So I actually go through and I will save each of these different sections. I will actually go and save away as a preset, so I can reload into the other one. So they're pretty much the same, and I don't need to change them at all. I am looking at migrating some of it into global rack spaces, but there's just a few things that I need to kind of figure out around the scripting to make it work, because there's some interaction points where I need things that maybe not available right now within the global rack space that I would like, but It's not the end of the world, but it's just some of the things I'm kind of doing. So these are all saved out, and then I just import, create a new song, and it's very, very simple to create a new song. And then the scripting is pretty much, as I say, very, very similar as well. So I've got it broken down into a couple of different sections. So I've got my beginning of my static block. As I said, software engineer, I like comments, I like the green stuff. So I've got a beginning of a static block and the end of a static block. Now that stuff is pretty much identical for every song. It's the same setup, and it actually is kind of all the plumbing, if you like, of what happens in the actual Rackspace itself. And then this section here is all of the specific stuff for this song. So, for example, you can see I've started playing around with OSC messages to control the lights. That might be a route I take instead of MIDI playback, because it makes things a little bit more organic and easier to program. So I've just started playing around with that now. And then I've got a whole bunch of methods that control the lighting, trigger a whole bunch of different things, and we'll talk about that in a minute. We'll go into detail. And then this is kind of really the thing that wires it all together. And this is really cool. I like this, and I'll kind of talk about it in a minute. So on the event, song event, on a bar beat, it goes away and does a whole bunch of things like triggering verse, chorus, and stuff like that. And this is the bit I'm most proud of on the scripts. And then there's a whole bunch of event changes that I do. So essentially, on the playhead state changed, when I stop a song. So if I either manually stop it or it reaches the end, it fades all the lights to black, which is really cool. So I don't need to worry about that. And then if I get any incoming OSC messages, obviously I'm currently just displaying those on a debug screen, but eventually I'll expand this out. And then on beat changed, basically I update my song beat bar, I update the beat step indicator, which you'll see in a minute, and then I call this on song event. Now,
so this part here that you're showing us, just to clarify, this is what changes you. This is what moves you through the song. Like
absolutely
progresses you through.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I say, I'm running the audio backing track for a particular song. For the March of Time, I've got the drums and all of the stuff mixed down is an MP3, and that's loaded into the audio player. But again, I started thinking about this. Obviously, I started configuring the pedal for the Behringer pedal to obviously change between the different sections of the song, so I could change between my patches, or the variations rather. So obviously, one Rackspace is per song, and then variations are per section of the song. And then I started thinking, maybe I can be a bit lazy here and actually not change it on the pedal at all, not even worry about it. How cool would it be if Gig Performer changed it all for me? And all I had to do was just play notes. I didn't have to think about the patch changes or whether I was pressing the right thing, or even whether I was near the pedal. I might have wandered off onto the other side of the stage and I've got to run back and press that obviously to reach the chorus. So I started playing around, and I've actually automated it all now. So I don't actually do any patch changes at all on any of the songs. It just selects the patches that I need when it reaches a measure in the song. So that's what this does. So this trigger intro, the beginning of the song, it puts out a debug message, which I've got essentially a verbosity level, so I can switch debugging on and off, which obviously uses the debugging within Gig Performer, and then I kind of set a level for the actual message. So for everything I do that's just so I can kind of see what's going on to make sure things are being triggered. So the first thing I do is I use set song part, which song part 0, which essentially sets variation 0. And it does that if we go down to the bottom on bar 1. So beat 1, bar 1, it does that. And then at bar 17, it triggers the verse. So as you can see, it's going through the whole song. It's actually changing all of my variations as I go through, which is really cool.
It's so nice. Well, it makes it like we were talking about earlier. Like you know, in order to deliver an immersive experience, you have to be able to be immersed. And this is what does it. This is the backbone, it seems like.
Yeah, and I've never been able to do this before. This for me was a relatively recent thing.
Okay.
When I started playing around, I went, hey, this could be cool. This would be really cool if I can not have to change any patches, and I can just concentrate on the performance and concentrate on engaging with the audience and enjoying the show. It's just one less thing to think about. So it's really cool. And then, as you can see, I've put in a bunch here of send OSC messages. which I've got the methods up here that essentially is sending that message to the right address. So this is going out and sending it, and this is what's currently controlling my lighting rig. So this particular message here is for light key, which will activate the intro, and then basically it'll go and activate various different lights, and this or deactivate as I need to. So these are actually sequences that are running. So I program a sequence within light key that will maybe run a strobe for a number of seconds, and then switch to some cans or sort of different spots or whatever. And I program that sequence in there, and then I just trigger that sequence and let it run throughout that section. So I can make this as complex or as simple as I want for every song, which is really cool. Yep. And it just means that gig performers, also my lighting engineer, as well as my sound tech on stage.
It's so good.
Yeah, and that's really cool. And then the other thing I've got on here, I've just got this timeline beat bar, which I'll show you in a minute, and the LED beat bar. And this bit code is just something that essentially, as we go through, it updates the beat step indicator, and it sets all of the LEDs. So it's basically just a button. There's a state button.
Yep.
It turns them all off. And then based on what beat you're on, it turns each beat on. So it kind of illuminates as you're going through the song, and just keeps going through, which is
your visual metronome.
Yeah, yep. Exactly. And for me, I mean, my timing can be a little bit trippy, so
so it helps. It helps.
And that's for the times when I don't want a click.
Sure.
So, yeah. And the way that I run the click actually was quite interesting. So we don't use the click for all songs and at all times. We just run the click maybe on an intro. So we've got one particular song, Ultraviolet, that just had some pads, and the guitarist sometimes might come in slightly late. So we actually fold the click track back into to the stage only. So in the audio setup, obviously if I go into where is it from? I'm trying to think where it's in general here. Yeah, so at the moment, obviously I've got the metronome output on 1 and 2 just for the purpose of this demo, but normally this will be switched off, and I'll just run it out the third channel, which basically the sound engineer will fold back onto stage, so that doesn't go to the front of house, but that will only appear on stage, which is really cool.
Yep.
Which is, again, was always really painful if I had to run the audio out. We had one gig where the engineer had run the click track to front of house as well, which you can imagine was not great.
It's happened to me before too. It's a real thing, and it's also the worst because everybody in the audience is looking at you going, what is that?
What's going on?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why have they got a click?
Yeah. Yep.
So I think probably now it's probably worth showing you all of that, how it works.
Yeah.
So just to show you, as I click through, if I go to the intro, you can see that the click light is enabled. So that obviously highlights and is illuminated for the intro.
Yep.
And then for the verse, it's switched off.
Gotcha.
And that's really useful.
Yep.
So I've actually got this all wired up to a MIDI controller here. So I've got a little Akai MPK Mini and all the pads programmed in the same way that I'd use the foot pedal live. And what I'll do is I'll actually use that to trigger. So I usually press the stop button, obviously a couple of times just to make sure nothing's running before I start a track.
Yep.
And then live, I'll press basically the play button, and that will actually kick off the backing track with the click track going back to the stage. And what I'll do is I'll let it run through, because essentially when it goes into the verse, you'll see that it will change the variation. And it also, because the variation doesn't have the click track on, it will actually disable that as well. And what I will do is I'll scroll down here later, and you can see the changes in the actual mixer that are automatically happening through the variations. So I'll kick off the playback, and let's see what happens. Hopefully it should work.
Yeah.
Cool. So what we've got here, we've got the backing track playing. You've got my visual cue going. Obviously, you've got the indicator for the beat and bar.
Yep.
And then we clicked into the variation for verse.
So nice. Yeah, it just makes it happen for you.
Yeah, and if I want to click on the metronome,
Yep.
I can put that on and it toggle on and toggle off.
Yep.
And that's really cool. So essentially, this is what I'm talking about. So I've got all of this stuff going on, which is really cool. The lighting will be triggered for each of those different sections that I need, and then when we kick back into the verse in a second,
yep,
it's changed the patch. So that's really cool.
It's so good. Yeah, it really takes care of the things that would be taking up mental space for you otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. So normally all of these things I would be doing live. So I'd be changing the patches, and I might be playing different songs, different synths. So for a while I was running the AX Edge live, and I had a whole different sort of patches on. I'd have to change it manually, and sometimes you get a little bit of delay between a verse and a chorus. And there's certain tracks. So for example, Selfish, I play a bass synth line in the verse, and then in the chorus I'm playing a pad sound.
Yep.
So A is on a different octave for a start, so I'm jumping from one octave to another, and I'm also having to try and do a patch change using favorites, which meant either timing, I might have to sort of end one section early or whatever, but now I don't need to do that because it takes care of all itself. And another thing that I've done to make my life a little bit easier as well, actually, is if I go back to the wiring view, with that in mind, I like to play at the top end of the AX Edge, because for the pose, I like where it is. I don't like playing lower down the keyboard or the octave range. I like to play higher up. But obviously, I still might be playing a bass patch sound. So what I use in here is obviously transposing, or the transposer option within each of the different sections. So, for example, that's down 2 octaves. This one's down 3 octaves. This one will be up an octave, and then this one will actually be neutral. So it means I can still play in the same place, and I don't have to move my hand around, but obviously it will play a different octave, which is really, really cool. And if I decide actually that's wrong, and I want to, in rehearsal it needs to be an octave up, I can change it in here, and I don't have to worry about it, and still play in the same place on the keyboard, which is
And I
think
I'm
lazy.
People, I think there's a misconception about MIDI in blocks that like you're supposed to, only have one, but like you can have unlimited MIDI in blocks, like, and each one does its own thing for its own section, and the way you've got it set up makes total sense. But it's powerful to have the option to really just, transpose things, or, I mean, the MIDI in block gets crazy, but having multiple MIDI in blocks actually makes a ton of sense, because then you're not setting a million different parameters. It's like transpose lives in one place. You put it the way you want, you wire it where it needs to go, and you're out. It's done.
Yeah, exactly. And if I want to, adjust velocity or any of that sort of thing for a particular patch, and only that patch, I can do that specifically for each one. And that's where the flexibility comes in. Or I might want to block expression, for example. If I've got a particular synth sound that if I use aftertouch, it makes it go a bit weird. Obviously, when you're live, you can't help sometimes but trigger that with the energy and performance, but you don't want it to come through. So I can just click, get rid of some of that, or get rid of this, and it's just not going to come through. And I can do that on per sound basis, the way that I've configured everything, which is just awesome.
It's beautiful. So, did we get through every element of this song?
Pretty much. We didn't play through the whole song, but
we got through the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, we pretty much got through the nuts and bolts.
So here's my question: is like, people have kind of checked out what's going on, like how can people see you play? Like, where do they get in touch with you? Are you playing soon? Like, tell us what's happening with Caffeine Kill and how we can see all that happen.
Sure. So I think probably like everybody else, we've spent the whole of lockdown literally scratching at the wall, just wanting to get out and play. So that's been a real challenge. We launched our EP, our new EP in March, which we were really hoping to be able to play live straight away. But obviously in the UK, we've gone through a number of lockdowns, and venues are really starting to open really just now. So it's been a long haul. But we have some shows lined up. So our first show back on the road is in Birmingham in the UK on September the 3rd.
Nice.
So we're playing with a couple of other really cool bands. So it's us. We have St. Lucifer and Zeitgeist Zero, who are both friends of ours we played with before, and they're of a similar style. We're also playing with a band called Nebula State as well, which is going to be really cool. So that's our first gig, and then our next one is not until October, October the 21st. We're playing in Nottingham, again with Zeitgeist Zero and with St. Lucifer. And that should be cool. And hopefully we're starting to book up some more as well. Now venues are starting to open up and people are feeling a little bit more confident, and they've had their vaccinations, or if they've chose to, then we're starting to book up some more shows. So that's where you can find us if you want to come and see us live.
Yep.
If you want to check us
Can
out
we
on
get tickets through your website, or how does that happen?
So tickets are available. So if you actually go onto our website, that should take you through to where you can buy the tickets.
Okay.
So there's obviously numerous different outlets. So Ticketmaster is one, but there's obviously various different outlets out there. But if you go to our website, it will take you through to the right places to be able to buy those.
Yep.
And obviously on there you can go and check out what we sound like as well. You can find out a bit more about us in terms of a little bit about our history. Obviously, it's got a whole bunch of stuff on there, which will link through to our Facebook pages, our Instagram, and Twitter, and such like. So, if you
and the Instagram is how we found you. So the Instagram page is beautiful. Check out Caffeine Kill Instagram. Do you have a personal one as well, or you do everything through Caffeine Kill?
So we have our Caffeine Kill one, which obviously you can check out. But there's also my personal one, which is CKO1_Mogg.
Okay.
And that's where I generally post up pictures of synths and sometimes rehearsal pictures or something like that. So I think that's where actually I put up the original picture for that you guys reached out to me and I started using it. So
awesome. We'll make sure we put a link for all these sites in the description. But Mogg, thank you so much for being with us and showing us around your live set. We really appreciate it.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and it's been great to talk to you again, Brett, and hopefully we'll catch up again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.
Cool.